Thank you for tuning in today and welcome back to another episode of The Source. I'm your host, Zain Raza. Before I start this interview, I would like to remind you to join our alternative channels on Rumble, Telegram, and a podcast called Podbean. If you're watching our channel regularly, you would know from our content that YouTube has a long history of shadow banning and censoring content from alternative independent media such as ours. Hence, we are asking all of our viewers as a precautionary measure to join these channels, as if that day ever comes, we won't be able to reach you even with an announcement. You will find the links to all of the channels in the description of this video. Today I'll be interviewing Professor Richard Wolff on a number of economic issues that include Germany's economy, Europe's militarization, Ukraine war, tariffs, and the emergence of AI. Professor Richard Wolff is an author, founder of Democracy at Work, Professor Emeritus of Economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Professor Richard Wolff, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
I want to begin with Europe's largest economy, Germany, which has shrunk for 2 years consecutive, 0.3% in 2023 and 0.2% in 2024. Major German corporations such as Siemens, Bosch, ThyssenKrupp, Volkswagen, and Deutsche Bahn laid off an estimated 60,000 workers in 2024. Germany's central bank is forecasting 0.2% growth this year. However, macroeconomic researchers at leading banks expect another year of recession and layoffs. Therefore, the economy has become one of the central topics in the upcoming election. Two parties from the left spectrum, the Linke, the left, and the newly emerged Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, BSW, advocate for demand-side economics, calling for an increase in the minimum wage to 15 euros per hour, stronger market regulations, expanded social benefits, and stricter rent controls. In terms of energy policy, BSW supports reopening Russian gas supplies. The Linke, on the other hand, supports a state-led expansion of renewable energy and stricter regulation of energy markets to prevent price speculation. The Social Democrats, SPD, which were in power before, proposes an industrial investment strategy under, quote, Made in Germany, unquote, initiative, also maintaining a welfare state and increasing the minimum wage to 15 euros by 2026. The SPD aims to accelerate the transition to renewable energy while providing state support to industry and households to counter high energy costs. The Greens emphasize large-scale public investment in renewable energy, seeking to phase out fossil fuels as quickly as possible. They propose a citizens' fund to stabilize pensions, a minimum wage of 15 euros, and a tax on billionaires to address wealth inequality, financing green infrastructure and energy projects. Meanwhile, the center-right conservatives, Christian Democratic Union, CDU, which currently leads the polls, is focused on supply-side measures such as tax cuts for corporations, businesses, and individuals, reducing bureaucracy, and reducing unemployment benefits to stir up employment. On energy policy, they support a mix of renewables, natural gas, and nuclear power. On the right, the Alternative for Germany, AfD, advocates for energy policy shift, opposing subsidies for renewable energy while favoring fossil fuels, nuclear power, and reopening Russian gas supplies to lower energy costs. They propose a number of tax cuts across the board that include tax relief for low and middle income earners, including the abolition of property tax, VAT reduction, and cuts in social spending to reduce public expenditure. Germany's economic model was for many decades hailed as a major success, and economists here call it the engine of Europe. However, some say that this model is now broken. Can you first talk about Germany's economic model and its past success, and thereafter provide your assessment whether any of these political parties can fix it and revive Germany back to its glory days?
Well, there's so many things for you to raise for me, and I'm going to try to go, because of the limits of time, to what I think is essential. The first one is to question the whole notion that the way to understand this is to juxtapose supply side with demand side. This is a game, if you permit me, of bourgeois economics. It abstracts from the issue of employers versus employees. Much more honest would be to say We are supporting either trickle down economics or trickle up economics. And let me explain, because people are not familiar with that, because the ideological war of the last 50 years makes this a difficult idea. Trickle down means, and this is true whether you are the Greens or you are the CDU or you are the Linke, it doesn't matter. But trickle down means that you give the government's money first and foremost to the corporations, the businesses of your society. You can do that with subsidy. You can do that with interventionist policies around energy. You can do it with tax cuts, or you can do it with combinations. But there's an alternative, which is to stimulate the mass of the people. Yeah, higher wages, tax cuts for the bottom, subsidies to purchase high cost energy, and a whole lot of other mechanisms that can be used. The political question is, do you favor the people at the top, hoping that by giving them the tax cuts and the subsidies and the government supports, it will trickle down in the form of better wages, more jobs, and so on? That's what the people at the top promise. But that's what they always promise. And that promise is never binding on them, because that's what capitalism means, that they can promise, but there is no control. No one comes 5 years later and says, okay, we gave you XYZ. Did it trickle down? If it didn't, we're punishing you. Nothing like that happens. Okay? So this is, in my judgment, an extremely important matter. There is no logic and there is no economics that suggests or guarantees that trickle down is a better way to kickstart an economy than trickle up. For every case where trickle down seemed to work, which happens sometimes, I can give you an example of how giving at the bottom built up the economy again. And the irony, which people should understand, is that we have almost 100% history of trickle down. We have an endless series, both in Germany and in Europe and in the United States, of giving help at the corporate level. A quick example: we just saw the defeat of Biden and of Kamala Harris. They were defeated because their interventions were all trickle down. They gave the anti-inflation bill, the Recovery Act, all of it gave huge amounts of money to corporations on the theory that it will trickle down. It didn't, and therefore they lost. I mean, if you want the simplest explanation, that's why Mr. Trump won. He didn't win because of him. He won because roughly 10 million people who had voted for Biden 4 years earlier couldn't do it anymore, and he lost those votes. Trump didn't gain them, he lost them. That's how the election worked out, number one. All right, now number two. Germany, this is how it looks from the United States. Germany had Wirtschaftswunder, right? We all learned to celebrate that. But the Wirtschaftswunder had 10% to do with German ingenuity and hard work and technical proficiency and all of that. And it had 90% to do with external circumstances, which are gone and which are not coming back. And I hope the German people understand that. Here were the two things they got: cheap energy, the cheapest energy in the world, provided by Russia, and a fantastic market called China, which bought the industrial exports of Germany, creating the export machine that Germany was and that lifted all of Europe. Now, I'm not suggesting that the rest of Europe has a debt to Germany, because Germany also manipulated the currency to create an imbalance between itself and the rest of Europe so that the rest of Europe subsidized German exports. You know that story, or if not, you should know the story. I'm not here to give moral lessons. I'm here to explain that the Chinese, especially now with BRICS, they have a whole nother world to cultivate. Germany, for them, is no longer very necessary, very crucial. They will buy goods from Germany. Make no mistake, they will be an important market for a while. But this is not the growth area for Germany because it isn't for China either. China has other things it's doing that are more important for its development. And it is now the power source. One of the things the Germans have to understand, question separate from the issue of Russia, oil and gas, is that China, the future of the world is right now China and the BRICS. And the Germans have to decide. And by the way, this is the problem for the French, for the British, for the Italians, for all of them. You have spent the last 75 years betting on the wrong horse. That's your problem. You have elected leaders, you have put parties into power who understood correctly that everything hung on the United States. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. But that is not the case. China is, at this point, the crucial player in all of this at all levels, from the highest tech, think of the deep seek, the story of the last few weeks, all the way down to mass production. They produce the best quality, cheapest electric vehicles on the planet, and everybody knows it. The United States has a 100% tariff against Chinese electric vehicles because there's no hope here of competing. The competition is over, and Mr. Trump is protecting what he can. Last point about this. Germany is being sacrificed. The United States is willing to flush Germany out of its economic universe, not because it's a good idea, not at all. Not because they want to hurt Germany, not at all. There's no real interest in that. The problem of the United States, and this has to be understood or else you will make one mistake after another. The United States' empire is over. We understand that now. Mr. Trump gets it, and the other people around him get it. You can't do what you could do in the second half of the 20th century when you had dominance of the United States during the period of the Soviet Union and especially afterwards. You had this unipolar moment. You had this extraordinary delusion of the United States being the dominant. It was dominant from 1945 to about 2010, but then it's over. It had its chance. It had its moment. It was, at the one hand, the most powerful empire we've ever seen, but it also is going to be one of the shortest that we've ever seen. And those things may be together. But what the United States is now doing is, in a way, what the Germans are having to do. When you're going down, when the empire is going down, what begins to happen is that the people at the top, the elite, the corporate leaders, the political leaders, the pressure becomes on them from the top 10, 15, 20% to hold on to the wealth and the power they had, even though the empire, even though the larger picture, it's over. So that means that the costs of decline are pushed off of the top onto everybody else. That is the agenda. That's the agenda for the entire West. That's why the war in Ukraine is finished. They can't afford it. They can't. It's not just that they can't beat the Russians on conventional warfare. That's true too. They couldn't. But they can't sustain the expense. Or to put it another way, if they're going to sustain the expense, if they're going to have any other adventures like this, it is going to accelerate the austerity they will have to impose on their own working class. And that's too dangerous. They too understand that a declining empire, if they're going to hold on to the wealth and power of the top, means desolation. That's what Trump is about. He is the systematic destroyer of the welfare state, the liberal consensus, all of that. When you hear Elon Musk going through and firing large amounts of public workers, that's what that's about. We have to economize. We can't continue. And we are going to hurt the people who are not us, everybody else. And we don't care. Look, we're about to cut the military budget, perhaps by as much as 5 or 8%. That shows you they are willing now. They feel desperate. They understand that the trajectory of the United States is down and the trajectory of China is up. And all of their policy is to say, we will take advantage of everyone we can to hold on. We will savage the American working class. We will abandon our allies, Mexico, Canada, the G7, Germany. Who cares? We don't care, because our problem is everything we have done for 20 years to slow down the Chinese has failed. Every effort to hurt them has failed. Now we can't even defeat, Russia, a poor country. China is no longer a poor country, but Russia is, relative to the United States, a poor country. We can't defeat them. We lost in Vietnam. We lost in Afghanistan. We lost in Iraq. The message is getting through to the Americans. They now have to save. The French have a wonderful saying, sauve qui peut, or in English, every man for himself. That's where we are, and Germany is in a very particular position because of its power within Europe, which is immense and very significant, but its weakness was its dependence on Russian energy and the Chinese market. That means you're dependent on the BRICS. That's what that means now. The BRICS is your future. The United States is your past. And you are making decisions betting on the wrong horse.
Let us dig deeper on that. Since Trump became president, we have seen a significant shift towards Russia and Ukraine. High-level talks between the US and Russia were recently held in Saudi Arabia, where preliminary discussions were held on ending the war in Ukraine and establishing a framework for restoring diplomatic relations. US President J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference last week was also seen as a turning point in NATO by European leaders, who have come to the realization now that they need to develop an independent security architecture. The European Union, which so far has provided Ukraine with almost $145 billion in financial, military, humanitarian, and refugee assistance to Ukraine, has been forced, as you've stated, into a corner by the US. The European Commission is planning to increase military spending to €500 billion over the next decade, saying that this amount will serve to deter any possible future Russian attack, as well as reduce its dependency on the United States. One of the ideas it's putting forward is to exempt defense spending from EU rules that impose annual spending limits on governments. Basically, it would allow EU member states to take on more public debt to finance defense and military spending. Just this week, the EU announced a 16th package of sanctions against Russia, banning the imports of Russian aluminum, which makes 6% of the EU's aluminum imports. In addition, 73 ships have been blacklisted that the EU suspects of being part of Russia's shadow fleet, which they say Russia has deployed to circumvent Western sanctions. In Germany, for example, all political parties, with the exception of the BSW and the Linke, have called to increase military spending over the 2% of GDP NATO target, and this also includes the far-right Alternative for Germany AfD. The Greens have gone so far as to aim for 3.5% of GDP. As the war in Ukraine is likely to end because one of its key backers in the US is withdrawing, the media here is fitting to provide a retrospective assessment of the economic policies that the West pursued up to this point against Russia, and whether they have achieved any of their intended goals at all. Can you provide that retrospective assessment and then touch on Europe's militarization plans as well as continuation of its sanctions policy?
Yeah, I'll do my best. It is a general understanding among most economists, if they are not working for the government, that sanctions do not work. On the one hand, they are never able to capture all the complexities of a modern market economy. And then that's a polite way of saying it is relatively easy to evade and escape and to circumvent that kind of policy. So it's a mystery for many of us around the world why the United States and Europe engaged in a sanctions war and why they continue. Basically, the argument is it does not work. It is a bad policy. Forget whether you're on the right side or the wrong side of an issue. As a mechanism, it's like shooting your gun in the air. If you shoot your gun in the air, okay, but it doesn't do much for the military situation because you're shooting it in the air. The sanctions are understood. I'll speak for myself. These are done for the domestic consumption of your population. It shows that the leaders are punishing Russia. It's part of the theater of modern politics. That's why you do it, not because it hampers. The Russians demonstrated over the 3 years of the Ukraine war that if Europe stopped buying oil and gas, they could sell their oil and gas somewhere else or sneak it into Europe. And that's what they've done. And they've used indirection. You're not going to stop that by sanctioning another 16 ships. This is childish. This is theater for your public. Russia has gotten stronger over these 3 years. The Europeans can't understand it, but that's a sign of real mental games. When did the United States become the global power? The answer was during and immediately after World War II. Why? Because the war put the United States back into economic functioning. The period from 1929 to 1940 is called the Great Depression. It was the worst catastrophe global capitalism had ever encountered. The closest thing to it was what happened in 2008, 9, and 10, which was the second worst. But the United States, when it went to war to offset the damage done by the Great Depression, which the war did. We took half the people who were unemployed and put them in a uniform, and we took the other half of the people who were unemployed and gave them jobs making the uniforms. That's how we did that. No one should be surprised that Russia going to war stimulates its economy. According to the IMF, Russian economic growth in 2023 and 2024 was about 4%. That is better than anything Europe achieved and better than anything the United States achieved. But no one should be surprised. That's how this can work. Not the first time, it's not an odd result, it's normal in the history of capitalism. Okay. It is therefore the case that for the United States, at this point, they don't want to be burdened by anything that they think costs them anything relative to what it brings to them. And they've made a political calculation. And the political calculation is, given the BRICS, the rise of China, and the survival of Russia in the face of all these changes, so that it is the number one companion of China on the BRICS, that it brings to China an extraordinarily highly developed military, including nuclear. It's crucial for China in many ways. Given that situation, Mr. Trump represents the notion, and I know this will come as a shock, but he represents the notion that there's more to gain for the United States from entering into a relationship with Russia that it has not had for a century. Since the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, that's the best chance they have of coming through the decline of their empire in the best possible shape for their society, and particularly for the dominant 10 or 15%. And if that means getting rid of the old leadership, they will do that because they see that the old leadership upon which they relied is defunct. Let me end with this. We now run deficits in our budget excess of $1 trillion. The relationship of our national debt to our GDP is the worst it's ever been. We are a society that cannot manage without an accumulation of debt. And in order for that debt to be achievable, in order for the U.S. government to keep borrowing, it needs to have the rest of the world able and willing to lend. That is a limited resource. The more in debt you are, the more dangerous it becomes for other societies to hold your debt. It's a very old problem. It even predates capitalism. The United States sees that it's on a track to be in worse, and its exports are going to have a harder and harder time. It thought it could rely on the latest technology, Silicon Valley, California. The Chinese have destroyed that. The Chinese are now able to match what Apple does, they can do. What Google does, they can do. The Europeans are completely out of the story. They play no role at all. There's a historical irony here which the Europeans need to worry about. And you know, I'm half a European myself. I'm an American. I was born here, but my first language is German. Meine Mutter war in Berlin geboren. You know, I understand. And my father was French. So I speak French. I follow. Europe, which was the colonial master of the world, is now becoming the child, the discarded child of the world. And that is going to be a reality so long as they continue to bet on the wrong horse. If you stay with the United States, you are going to go down with the United States. And it's going to be the United States that pulls you down. If you want a metaphor, it's like trying to help a drowning person. if you've ever been taught how to help people in the water, you are told be very careful. Drowning people grab at anybody in the area and pull them down with. You've got to manage that. Europe can find a way, it can, but it has to be open to looking at a changed world. And they're not doing that. And that, in the end, is what I think is going to hold them back. And with all due respect, I don't see coming out of the German political struggle, I don't see this being engaged. It's like in the United States in our election last year between Trump and Harris. Neither one of those candidates could dare say to the American people, our empire is declining. Here's what we need to do in the. They couldn't. They couldn't. And I have the feeling as I watch the German election, you can't face the realities either. A subvention to deal with high energy prices. That doesn't solve your problem. You know, where are you going to export? Not only will the Chinese not permit you for their own development, but look at the United States. They're about to hit you with tariffs, more or less, but the handwriting is on the wall. They're saving themselves and not you. You know, of course, Volkswagen is closing factories in Germany. They either open them in the United States or they can kiss those exports goodbye. They're finished. We are entering a period in which the leading capitalist countries are declining, the West, and they are protecting themselves with tariffs and all the other apparatus of nationalism. And that's where they're going. They're convinced that's the way to go. They're convinced that the Germans and the Europeans will eventually follow them, as they have in the past. And so they're not going to be held back. And they're going to make an alliance with Russia if Mr. Putin allows them to. All the everything is changing in the world. Let me hammer at that. If you add up the GDP of China and the other BRICS, it's now more than about 35, somewhere between 35 and 40% of total world output. If you add up the GDP of the United States and the other 6 members of the G7, Germany, France, Britain, Italy, Canada, and Japan, that they together have about 28%. Okay, 35 to 40% of the wealth is over there. And 28, what are you doing in Germany? You have to deal with that and with the forces that are making that happen and the forces that are taking you to the next step. Holding on to what you did in the past is an absurd recipe for failure.
To my last question, and we only have 5 minutes remaining, but I really wanted to get this topic across. We have seen the emergence of AI like China's DeepSeek, which you mentioned, and OpenAI's ChatGPT, and there's a major transformation taking place across the global economy. Many industries are being affected. The World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs Report 2025 anticipates that by 2030, AI and other information processing technologies will transform 86% of businesses, leading to the creation of 170 million new roles worldwide while making 92 million existing jobs redundant. Can you talk about whether the promise of technology to free humanity from drudgery and mundane tasks so that they can engage in creative and intellectual pursuit is finally being realized by this AI transformation?
Yes, I will give you a very old answer because this is a very old question. And the old form of the question is every technology, whether it is the power loom or modern chemistry or atomic energy, any of the electricity, any of the major breakthroughs were always defended on the grounds that they could relieve labor drudgery, the need to sweat your body to feed your body, all of that. And they have always disappointed. America is arguably one of the most advanced technological societies, and I can assure you, as an American worker, which is what I am, we are exhausted. We work more hours. We work faster. The liberation of technology is something we can only think about in the future because no one in their right mind would talk about it now. In other words, the problem has never been technology. The problem is capitalism. What do I mean? It means you only install a technology, a new one, if and to the degree that it enhances the profits of your business. I'm now going to give you a simple example, simple arithmetic. Imagine you're a producer. You have 100 workers in your factory or your office or your store, and a new technology comes across. AI, it doesn't matter. And so suddenly, to produce the same number of goods, to charge the same price as before, you don't need 100 workers. You can do with 50. The capitalist says, wonderful. He fires 50 workers and he says to the others, here's the new machine, here's the new technology. You now produce twice what you used to produce. He sells the same output at the same price, so he gets the same revenue. But he enjoys a wonderful profit because the 50 workers he used to have to pay, he doesn't have to pay anymore. So he keeps that portion of the revenue for his own profit. All right? Now, that means that 50 people are unemployed. They are desperate. They will go look for work because otherwise they don't live. And they will offer to work at a lower wage, or they will work harder, or they will work more hours. They create the difficulty for the working class because of what the employer did. Now, here's the punchline. Suppose it wasn't a capitalist business. Suppose it was a worker co-op run by communists or socialists or just decent people. Here's what the alternative was. Take in the machine, which makes every worker twice as productive, and give everybody a 4-hour working day instead of an 8-hour working day. Because in a 4-hour working day, they can produce the same number of goods, sell them at the same price, bring in the same revenue as before. The capitalist profit won't go up, but the workers would have enjoyed a spectacular increase in their leisure, in their time to be creative, to have a family, to be active politically in the community. More people would benefit much more from that way of dealing with technology, and then we would have seen what the technology promised: the liberation of human beings from labor. The reason we don't have that is not the fault of the technology. It's that we're holding on to a capitalism that has outlived its usefulness in human history. And that was the message, I don't mind reminding everybody, of that old Deutscher Mann, Karl Marx.
Professor Richard Wolff, economics professor and author, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Zain. I'm really happy to be talking with you again.
And thank you for tuning in today. If you watched this video until the very end, please just take a few moments to join our alternative channels on Rumble, Telegram, and a podcast called Podbean. If we ever get shadow banned or censored, we won't be able to reach you and you won't be able to watch any of our content. As a precautionary measure, we are asking all of our YouTube subscribers to join these channels. I thank you for your support and for tuning in. I'm your host Zain Raza, and see you next time.